Okay, someone had a question on one of the tunnel videos I posted last week. This person lives apparently on the coastline of the United States. The particular area where he lives, he said there's not much topsoil, not enough to dig tunnels in. It's a lot of rocks and that stuff because he's near the coast. So he's wondering, well, what could he do instead of digging tunnels? And the answers to that should be pretty obvious. I wrote some things up there. Now, first off, caves. If you're out in the wild and that stuff, if you're inside a city, especially a bigger city, you've seen this a lot in Europe during World War II. The sewer systems or the undergrounds of the cities. You already have pre-made tunnels that go through everywhere, but if you're inside those, you got to beware of builds up of explosive gases and toxic gases. So you will need to get some type of air monitor like your utility crews use that constantly samples the air to find out if it's starting to turn bad and that stuff. Another possibility, which you'll see especially on the coastlines, I know in the west coast they have this, is drainage tunnels. Areas to channel water to an area, away from an area and that stuff, out in farm country and that. Because you may be in an area that receives too much rainfall. And they're trying to drain that water away and still keep more of the land usable for farming or whatever. Another option, which would be in the southern part of the U.S., western part of the U.S., is mines, old mines. But be extremely careful on that. I will post a video on, I think it was like 7 or 9 dangers of old mines. Things to watch for, be careful of. That'll be inside the description. Another thing which a lot of people do not realize is out there, old fortifications. These fortifications can go back to the Civil War or pre-Civil War. They're old. A lot of them have brick-lined walls and that stuff, and they've been forgotten for an extremely long time. That's where it comes into learning the history of your area. You'd be surprised what you'll find. A lot of those fortifications were used during World War II. They were built pre-World War II and early in World War II to protect the harbor cities and potential landing sites that Japanese or German forces could use. So there was fortification tunnels put in. Some of those have been turned into attractions and that type of stuff. Others were concreted over. They put concrete block or brick across the entrances and backfilled with dirt so that no one can get into. This comes into, again, learning the history of your area. A lot of that stuff, a lot of those old military tunnels, guess what? They were built to last. And they're probably going to be in pretty decent shape. They're going to have rooms in there that were designed as barracks, rooms that were designed as latrines, as cook areas and all that stuff. You might have to go through and replace the equipment because they probably stripped it. You're definitely going to have to go through and replace the ladders because when they closed down a lot of those fortifications, they cut those metal rungs out of the ladders that were in the sides of the wall so no one could climb through there. So you're going to have extension ladders, build ladders, and that type of stuff. But those are just some alternatives you can look for. Now, I will post a couple links to cave exploration safety. That one of them's from like the Forestry Service, the other one is from a state, I think it was like Indiana, on recommendations on how to be safe and that stuff. What to watch out for, what to do, what not to do when you're exploring caves. First off, I will say go in there as a group. Do not go in by yourself. I would recommend, say, a 6-person crew. 2 people on the outside, and they always remain on the outside as essentially the base camp. And then 4 people going inside. Always stay with your battle buddy. 2-person teams. Never explore anything on your own. Always have someone else with you at all times when you're doing this. And then being extra careful when you're going through there. On the dangers of mines, I will point this out, and you'll probably have it with caves too, and some of the drainage tunnels. Beware of snakes, especially in the southwest and the western part of the United States. Beware of rattlesnakes. The guy pointed out that snakes are basically giant, or caves and mines are giant snake dens, because they have their own self-sustaining food source inside. You're going to have your pack rats, your field mice, and all that stuff living inside them. So the snakes are going to go in there. They're going to live in there, and they're going to survive in there. They're going to live off those mice and that stuff. They can get water whenever they need it, from dripping down from the wall from when it rains outside, and when it pools on the floors inside there. He said that the first 20 feet of an old mine or a cave, that's the biggest danger area for snakes. So when you go inside of caves, mines, tunnels, anywhere you haven't been before, make sure you wear a good boot that's nice and thick, so no canvas jungle boots. You want something with nice thick leather. You want protection on it. Maybe have those little snake bite gaiters and that stuff that you put on around the, your lower legs and that stuff, in case there is a snake strike. It won't get through that leather protective cover or Kevlar or whatever it is to inject its venom into you, so you're prepared for that. So be prepared for snakes. Be prepared for the possibilities of cave-ins and rock falls and stuff. So you're going to want to wear some type of construction helmet or cave exploration helmet, some type of padding and that stuff. That's if some type of rock falls from overhead, it hits you, it's not going to knock you unconscious, it's not going to kill you, depending on the size. I do recommend that if you do decide to use a particular cave, mine, old fortification, or drainage tunnel, sewers, any of that stuff, go through and improve it, especially with the caves and the mines. You're going to want to put in more timbers, especially on the old mines. You're going to want to reinforce, put in some new stuff. Don't rely on the old timbers that are in there. Put in new stuff. Do not take the old stuff out unless it has completely fallen down, it's laying on the floor, and it's not supporting a damn thing. Then you remove it. Otherwise, go in there, put in brand new timbers, brand new lagging, and all that type of stuff to keep the roof and the sides up. Really go overboard on that wherever you're going to have a sleep area, and your infirmaries and your aid stations and stuff. Those areas you definitely need to have thick timbers as your overhead cover, supported by good timbers underneath to support the extra weight from a bombardment or just the earth itself shifting, which could be because of an earthquake. There's always the possibility of that happening. You have to take that into account. Just because there's a war going on does not mean that Mother Nature stops with her little stuff. So you can expect the possibility of tremors and earthquakes happening. Prepare accordingly. Make sure to get those emergency exits put in. If there's old emergency exits, old air shafts and stuff, go through, reinforce them, put in new ladders, whatever's needed, so that you can use those to escape. Now, where should you start putting in those improvements? I would really recommend putting it in farther back. So probably 50, 60 feet, maybe more farther back from the entrance of the cave or the mine. So that way, if any patrol's moving through, they're doing a cursory search. They're going to know about snakes being inside there, so they're not going to want to go in very far, so they're just going to look inside. If they don't see anything, they might pass on. Watch your footprints going in and out of caves and mines. Make sure to use brush or something to cover up your footprints as you're going inside. Have that, last couple people behind you swinging those pine boughs or cedar boughs, you know, tree branches with leaves, whatever behind you, sweeping up your footprints and that stuff behind you, concealing them. That'll cut down on patrols moving through and wanting to go in and check further into those areas. And obviously with drainage and sewers, be wary of footprints and take care of them accordingly, because as you're stepping in the muck and the mud and whatever is on the bottom, you're going to leave footprints and stuff. With old fortifications, camouflage those entrances and exits that you reopen, so that hopefully they don't notice that you have opened it back up. So maybe you're going through, you're, you know, planting some shrubbery and that stuff around it to conceal it. This is where your pre-war recons and all that stuff really comes into play. Now down here, this is something I want to mention. I became aware of this not long after 9/11, when troops first started going into Afghanistan. Soldier of Fortune ran an article on tunnel and cave clearance done by the Russian army in Afghanistan to give some lesson learned for U.S. troops. I do want to find the article because it is a video I really want to do. But there is one way that they did it using a couple of landmines. You would set one off, and then a split second later you set off another one that was a little bit farther into the cave from the entrance. The blast from the first mine created a plug on the cave entrance. That split second later, when that second mine went off, the blast force travels the path of least resistance, which would be down the cave, down the mine, down the tunnel, and away from the entrance, because you have that big pressure ball from the first mine at the entrance that's pushing inward. The second mine goes off, it hits that pressure ball behind it at the entrance, and it bounces it, pushes it inside. What happens then, the overpressure from the blast, depending on how far away you are down the cave in that tunnel and stuff, it can rupture your internal organs, it can rupture your eardrums, it can break bone, depending on how far you in and how large the blast was that they set off at the entrance, and how many twists and turns there were in the cave before it gets to you. So farther in, for when you have your little entrance into your shelter, you're farther in, I would recommend putting in thick walls of sandbags, 2 of them, extra thick. Say give yourself 3 foot, 4 foot solid of sandbags from floor to ceiling. Maybe on the front of it here, maybe you'll put in a bunch of rocks and that stuff, make it look like it was a natural collapse from the ceiling, concealing the sandbags as much as possible, but you still have to have that path that you can get around it. Now behind it, I would, just for extra support and that stuff, put in some logs going from floor to ceiling, maybe dig them down into the floor a little bit, you know, a foot or 2, whatever, to get them down in there, and then brace them up against the ceiling and that stuff. Brace them down on the floor. These will be right behind your sandbags, so maybe put this wall in, then start stacking your sandbags in front of it, butting them right up against the logs. That'll help also with cushioning the blast. That wall that's immediately behind it should be the same thickness, because you still got this little path here that pressure wave can travel, and it'll hit this second wall the same way it'll hit that first one. So you're going to want this the same thickness, and then past the length of your entrance here, the width of your entrance, put in those supporting logs also. You may not have to go all the way down if you don't want to. And then have another one behind it on your little serpentine. Doesn't need to be as thick as these 2, maybe half the thickness. Now the reason you do this, they learned this in World War I in trenches. Blast waves get heavily dissipated by turns. So we have the blast coming in here, the blast force coming down this way. It's going to hit this wall, some of it's going to make it around, it's going to hit this way. Because these are sandbags, they're going to cushion, they're going to absorb some of the blast, but some of it's still going to bounce around in here. It's going to hit this wall, bounce off, and it's going to come down this direction, bouncing this way. Some of it will get absorbed down here, but some of it will still travel this way. Not much, it will be greatly reduced, but it can still happen. So then you have to have that next wall here of sandbags to stop it, because it's probably not going to bounce from here going this way. It's going to come in, some's going to bounce this way, it's going to bounce here into here. Some of it may come in and make that little turn just a little bit, but the pressure is going to be greatly reduced, and that's what's going to stop it back there. So now, should you put some type of firing port or something inside that sandbag wall? I really wouldn't. Considering that these are blast walls, I would not put some type of bunker slit or firing port going through it. If I have to defend from it, I will defend from the backside of it firing down. Now, another thing you could do, you have your little sentry position up in here that's monitoring and that stuff. The enemy starts coming in, maybe have some little warning devices that'll let you know how far the enemy is in the tunnel. Something you could do, hide some claymores and that stuff up along the ceilings, on the walls higher up. Make sure that it is backed by rock, which will help push that force forward. So say you have a string of mines along one ceiling wall, string of mines on the other, and they're angled downward. They're not angled at each other, they're angled downward. The enemy comes in, you set off one batch of mines. You take out the force as they're moving in. Well, maybe they figure, okay, you've blown your wad, you've set off all your charges. The next force starts coming in, you set off the mines on the other side. Well, that'll really screw them up, won't it? Two blasts, one after another, wiping out two forces trying to come inside. Maybe they're going to, at that point, they're going to question should they continue, because, you know, who knows how many more charges are set in there waiting to catch them out in the open. Walking down a tunnel, that giant funnel of death leading right to you. At that point, they're more than likely going to seal off the cave entrance. They're going to blow it, seal it up, trying to trap you inside. Well, that's when it comes into, you're going to have your escape tunnels farther back. Make sure to have good storerooms in there. Make sure to account for drainage. Have sumps that are farther down. Say your very bottom level is for drainage of water, surface water, stuff that comes in from rains, whatever, to keep your stuff relatively dry. If you're using drainage tunnels, you're using sewers and that, maybe you're going to want to raise the floor, you know, give yourself a foot, 2 foot of separation with the floor, so that that will be the floor of your rooms and that stuff, especially in your sleep areas. I do not recommend sleeping inside sewers. Try to find an area that's going to be drier and a hell of a lot more sanitary to use to stay in. Recommendations on that would probably be basements. Close off basements and abandoned buildings. You do find this in really big cities. When they went through and they put in city parks and that stuff, if they tore down some buildings, they may not have filled in the basements. They may literally have just poured the concrete, the asphalt and that stuff right over the top of it. You know, they might have put down, say, a few inches, maybe a foot of dirt and rock over the top of the floors of the buildings that were there, and then they just laid the concrete and all that stuff over the top of it. So it does happen where you'll have basements that are still in the ground, they're concealed. Does occur. Those are potential hiding spots, potential hide locations, sleep areas, and that stuff inside big cities. So maybe you're going to want to research into that also. Talk to the older residents that have been in that area a long time and ask them, hey, how long has that park been there? What was there beforehand? What happened when they put that park in? Did they fill in the basement or didn't they? Do your recons, find out as much information as you can. A public library can be a good friend, and so can the internet for researching this stuff. You can find listings and directories for caves and mines in a lot of states. Obviously, the ones that are the most popular that people go to and that stuff for exploring are the ones you're going to want to stay away from. You're going to want to go to the harder to get ones, the ones that hardly ever get checked out. Those are the ones that you're going to want to try to use for your shake and bake tunnel systems that are already there that you're going to improve. It really is recommended you get some type of mine engineer or someone, a geologist or something with your crew when you're planning out these tunnels. I know it's going to be tough because a lot of them are from academia and they're going to be leftist leaning, but you may luck out. You might find a few that are patriots. You know, God provides once in a while. He might give you a break. Get him on your engineering crew to help you with designing your tunnel systems, your shelter and that stuff. And I suggest you do it now because you never know when the war is going to begin, so it does not hurt to go through, recon these things out, get the materials, start doing the reinforcing and that stuff now. Make that old mine disappear. You know, improve the interior and that stuff, maybe completely close off the old entrance and you're using an old emergency exit as your new entrance into the tunnel. Who knows? Things to consider. Now, for all my engineer brothers in the Patriot and Militia movements, always remember, Essayons.